It is a pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. She is a New York Times best-selling columnist who you can read online at AnnCoulter.com. Ann Coulter, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be in, it's not Palm Springs, it's the hated Palm Springs.
You are the only person who calls it that.
Well, it's not that when I'm visiting, but other than that, you guys all bail out, leave town when I want to go out in L.A.
Well, there's no place to go right now.
I've heard.
You can eat on the patio and get harassed by a bunch of bums, but that's about it.
That sounds very enjoyable.
Don't you want to just spend your vacation dollars here?
Yeah, and, that's why I think it is just a fantastic idea for Biden to take as his vice president, Kamala, someone produced by that wonderful, welcoming, enterprising state of yours.
Now, you don't get the gold medal with the predictions this time around, but you do get the silver, because you predicted Kamala was going to be the Democratic nominee. She didn't get that, but she's number 2.
Yeah, and she may end up being the nominee the way Biden's health looks right now. I think it's fairly well acknowledged that she is the technical nominee. Poor Biden. It really is a cruel thing they're doing to him, and it's weird because they just did the exact same thing with Robert Mueller. I remember looking at his resume when he was chosen as independent counsel, and I recommend that anyone look it up. He is a very impressive individual and seems like, sorry to use a cliche, but a straight shooter, an honorable man. And then suddenly, we never saw him, but we kept getting leaks. And, all of those Pulitzer Prizes being won by the New York Times for just a completely sleazy, off-the-rails investigation. It baffled me as that was going on, what had happened to Robert Mueller. You always worry when the old dogs get older, they start thinking about going for the New York Times obituary. But no, it wasn't that. Then, a year later, we see this poor old guy testify, and he won't be hearing this, and probably no one related to him, so I'll just speak truthfully. He's obviously impaired. It made me cry watching him. He reminded me of my father, who had a form of dementia toward the end, and it was just heartbreaking watching him. Now we're seeing pretty much the same thing with Biden, who was, he didn't have the stellar resume that Robert Mueller did, but he did have a pretty moderate career, was a likable person. He would have been a good candidate if he were not in the grips of senile dementia, but he is. And anyone can see that, so they just think, as with Mueller, we just, won't put him too much in front of the cameras. We'll tape record anything he needs to say, wait until, he's better in the afternoon. We'll only release him then, tell him to go by the teleprompter and hook him off the stage if things get bad. But other people, maybe Andrew Weissman again, will actually be running the country. And, of course, the named person he has chosen to run the country is Kamala, who's very popular with the hipsters and the Californians. And again, love what you've done with that state.
Don't blame me.
Most beautiful state in the Union. Only Democrats could wreck California.
Now, you work with Joe Biden when you worked in the U.S. Senate. Now, I asked Bob Beckel last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, the question, has Joe Biden obviously deteriorated by your estimation? And Beckel's response was, Biden has always been like this. Biden always put his foot in his mouth. Biden was never a particularly great public speaker. This is the same old Joe. As someone who's worked with him regularly, is it the same old Joe?
No, that is absolute nonsense. Yes, he's been gaffe-prone, but there was always, as I was defending him before we saw too much of him, before the Democratic debates started, even on the calling Obama, it's a great story. You have this African-American come along who's clean, articulate. I actually thought that gaffes, other than when he starts boasting about himself, are the Kinsey gaffes, where a politician inadvertently says something that's true. By clean, everyone took it to be an insult. I took it to mean he's not Al Sharpton. He's not a shakedown artist. I thought it was a perfectly legitimate point to make. But no one could ever get mad at him I know conservatives love playing this stuff about, to work in a 7-Eleven, you have to have a slight Indian accent. Oh, come on. It may not be that funny, but there's not a cruel bone in his body. I really, really don't think so. Well, he was kind of a D-bag to Robert Bork, so I'll take that back. I really hated him back then. But by and large, no, yes, he's made gaffes before. This is something different. To act like dementia is different from someone making gaffes is preposterous. And you don't have to take my word for it from having worked at the Senate Judiciary Committee. Look at those Senate Judiciary Committee hearings. I mean, he was famous for the river of words. He'd start talking, and whoa, you just could not stop him. I mean, you'd fall asleep halfway through. But he had an active mind. Just because he was a blowhard and made gaffes, yeah, that much is true. The completely losing his train of thought, the repetition. There are a couple of weird ones he comes up with that. Come on, man. And the other thing he does, which is clearly dementia, and it's a crutch, and that is he completely forgets what he's talking about, and he says, well, I don't think I should say that. As if he was about to say something like un-PC or mean, but if you look at the train of where he's going, he's not about to say something un-PC. It's just a crutch. I forgot where I was.
Well, let's listen to some tape of him earlier today. He's on stage with Kamala, and I think he forgets her name because he doesn't refer to her by name. Let's listen.
Now let me turn it over to my colleague and running mate. She has a few comments to make.
Thanks, Joe. That's what real leadership looks like. We just witnessed real leadership.
He did not know her name.
I think that's right. And also you can tell by the, I don't even know how to describe it, but that sort of deep, slurry voice. And look, I take no pleasure in pointing this out. I'm terrified that we'll all end up like this someday. I just think this is a scam that the Democrats are pulling on us, as they did with Robert Mueller. Everybody can see what's going on. Now, it may not make a difference. Don't want to be I'll end it with a happier note, but I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. But in the same way, no matter what the polls showed, I thought Trump was going to win in 2016, and quite famously said so publicly and on tape.
On Bill Maher.
On Bill Maher. And even at the end when the polls, every single poll said it was, 80 to 98% likely Hillary wins, and I was being browbeaten, and, are you some troglodyte who doesn't believe polls? All I could say was, I'm not a troglodyte who doesn't believe polls. They're generally, in the ballpark. They show movement. I'll admit all that. But I still think it is more likely than not that Trump wins this election. And part of my reason for that was I just felt like there was this huge feeling in the country. Number one, Trump is running on this basket of issues we've never been able to vote on. We don't care about him personally. Trade, bring manufacturing home. Obviously, immigration, build the wall, number one. No more pointless wars. No Republican would ever offer us that. It was always two versions of the uniparty in Washington. So I thought a lot of people, you have that category of people. And then you also had a category of people, which unfortunately we don't have. Millions of us had spent 20, 30 years hating Hillary Clinton. And our attitude was, don't even tell me who's running against her. I don't want to know. I am voting for anyone who is not Hillary. Now, I think that same phenomenon could be working against Trump this year. That's why the Access Hollywood tape wouldn't touch him. That's why nothing would touch him. They were voting against Hillary and for this basket of issues and a pro-American agenda. I think a lot of people In fact, I wouldn't entirely exclude myself, want to hold Trump's head underwater until the bubbles stop, are furious with him either for good and sufficient reasons as I have, or just for stylistic reasons, and they're, sick of the chaos and the hysteria in the media. And you may have some of them saying, I don't even care, don't tell me who's running against Trump, I'm voting for anyone who isn't Trump. But the theme of my book, Resistance is Futile, is it would be so easy to beat Trump. I could beat Trump. I mean, not personally, but I could advise people. In fact, I do in my book, Resistance is Futile, begging Democrats to attack him for not keeping his promises, instead of making up this nonsense about Russia and being hysterical and lying. I think a big portion of the country hates the media more than they could ever hate Donald Trump. And I'd put myself in that category. I can't say I'm enthusiastically going to vote for Trump, but I will enthusiastically vote against the media.
Well, and you also have this pandemic that has just upset everyone's life, where if you work in certain industries, the government is telling you can't go to work. If you are, taking your kids to school and your kids are starting, first year of kindergarten or whatever, they're missing all of those milestones. People who are in their 80s who have good health, but know that maybe in 2, 3, 4, 5 years that health may go away, are spending their healthy years sitting around their house watching TV. And you have one option where he clearly wants to open up the country much sooner than anyone else in that town. And you've got the other alternative, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who I think could keep the country shut down for 2 or 3 years, which is what Canada says they're going to do. People look at that, and maybe they're pissed off at him and immigration, and they're pissed off at him about trade and other things. But your livelihood matters more than all of that other stuff. And if you can't go to work and you can't send your kids to school, not much else matters.
That's a really good point. In this way, I don't trust myself. I think I'm not like normal people this way. I can't see blaming the president for a pandemic that has swept the globe. But apparently the media thinks this is gonna hurt Trump. So they have been pushing and recording every little death, including some. There's no death that's little. Don't want to be jumped on for that. But every death, including those that probably are not directly caused by COVID, just pushing it. But what you say, again, it's resistance is futile. They can't oppose this guy in a way that will work. So whatever advantage they would get from people blaming Trump for COVID, all these Democratic governors come in, and I'm sorry, another horrible cliche, but it's apt here. Hold my beer. No, we're going to shut down this state, but I'm going to still get my haircuts. That's Governor Whitmer. We're going to arrest, men playing t-ball with their daughters in the park. We're going to chase guys who are running on the beach. That's the Democrats' response to this. And yeah, that's got to terrify people.
Well, and then what's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris going to do the next time a major American city burns to the ground? My guess is they're going to be silent, or they're going to throw out some platitude, and they're not going to say knock it off. Because if they say knock it off, they're going to piss off their base, and no one who's looting the city is going to pay attention to them anyway.
Well, that's the main thing that is helping Trump through, nothing he's done. And in fact, he's doing the exact same thing as the Democrats. Let's see how I can snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Not because of anything he's done. He should have sent in the National Guard. He should be sending in the National Guard to put down these insurrections. It's his job. He's the president. I'm annoyed at him for that. Yet and still, wow, the Democrats, they're attaching themselves to Black Lives Matter. They are supporting Antifa and the looting and the criminals and releasing the criminals. People are dying. They are being raped. They are having their property destroyed. And the Democratic Party is with the criminals and the looters and the rioters. So not for any love of Trump, I think people will. Do you think This is the one way Trump could really get his Hispanic vote up. Latinos are mostly the victims of criminals. They get beaten up and have their money stolen. We have these videos of Hispanic gang members, the Latin kings, protecting Hispanic neighborhoods with guns and knives, and not being one iota politically correct about it, John Phillips. Not politically correct at all. I heard some words that are very, very bad. I mean, maybe they won't vote, but I don't think they're voting for the party that is cheek by jowl with Black Lives Matter.
Well, I can tell you, I was sitting in a restaurant here in California. I just flew back. I was in Texas for a week, and I went to one of my regular neighborhood hangouts, but it was during the pandemic, so the restaurants were open. It was in that brief window, but it wasn't packed like it normally is. And I'm sitting in the bar, having my dinner, having a cocktail or two, and I'm the only white guy in the room. It's all Latinos and me, and I was one of two.
Were you in El Coyote?
No, I'm out in the desert.
Oh.
And I was one of two Republicans in the room. So everyone there was Hispanic, and everyone there was a Democrat except for me and one other. Mm-hmm. And hearing the play-by-play as we have the TV on in the background, as we're watching the city burn and we're watching the looting going on, they wanted to run those people over with tanks.
Yes. That's exactly my point.
Yes.
And
the language
as you may have seen... Go ahead.
The language that you just described was on full display in the bar that night.
Well, and to be more specific on how Trump is going to blow this, could blow it. So glad he listened to Jared and pushed through that First Step Act to release criminals early, because that's totally the mood of the country. Republicans are always winning by saying, I released more criminals. And I noticed right after Kamala was chosen, I went on and in my own intemperate terms attacked a few conservatives on Twitter, doing the idiot things that my party always does. How do they decide they're going to attack Kamala? By saying she was too tough on crime. She was a badass DA, locked up criminals. I don't care if you produce an innocent person who went to prison. We want more people in prison, not fewer people in prison right now. That's the mood of the country.
Let me go back to the mayors and the governors here for a second, because I think this could be the issue in this campaign outside of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Because it's not just Trump versus the governors and the mayors, which is certainly the headline and what everyone's paying attention to right now. But it's not just the mayors and the governors who are taking that indefensible position. So is corporate America. So is the NFL. So is the NBA. So are all of the universities. So are all the television networks. Every major institution in the country feels like they're boxed in and has to take a completely ridiculous position that puts them on the side of people who are burning down cities. It's all of those entities versus Trump. And that is a good, clean distinction that he can use in the election, in the campaign. It's a completely legitimate one, by the way, because that's how everyone is lining up. And that gives voters about as clear of a choice as you can have.
Yes, though, I'm sorry, your listeners are really going to get fed up with me. It would be nice if you'd actually do something. And not just tweet out conspiracy theories about, Joe Scarborough killing his intern. It would be nice if he would do something like protect his supporters on social media run by these huge tech companies. If he would send in the National Guard to defend these neighborhoods being burnt down. This is an insurrection. You do have a constitutional right to assemble, to engage in free speech. Well, you sure can't do that in Portland. You can't do that in Seattle. You pretty much can't do it in New York. This is not just a backup to law enforcement. The reason we have have a constitution rather than Articles of Confederation was because we needed a strong national government to suppress insurrections. These are insurrections. He's let this go on long enough. And, I mean, you're right. It's a binary choice. If my choice is a sack of potatoes versus all these people, I'm voting for the sack of potatoes. But it would be nice if the sack of potatoes would get up from bed, stop tweeting. I don't care about the tweets per se. Stop watching TV and actually do something to defend law-abiding people in this country, to defend his supporters on Twitter, to stop giving corporate America, which hates America, all of this cheap foreign labor. But no, when it comes, as with his entire presidency, when it comes to actually doing something, that's when everything falls apart.
Ann Coulter, we're going to have to leave it there. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for stopping by. And if you haven't read Ann's column this week, go do it right now at anncoulter.com. Ann, thanks so much.
Good to talk to you, John Phillips. Bye-bye.